We have already had one earlier in the year where we had Dr. Greg Tosin speak to us about design thinking. Today we have the pleasure of having Jürgen HODANN, who will be talking to us about systems and opportunistic behavior. Before he starts with the presentation, I'd like to remind everybody that there will be another seminar coming up, and everyone will be notified of the topic and the presenter and so on at a later stage, but be sure not to miss that. And do also log into our website. We have lots of other events and activities that are hosted by the South African System Dynamics chapter. Lots of freebies. So we have, of course, the Learning Lab. The second stream will be starting, and you don't have to have System Dynamics modeling skills to be part of it. Be sure to register for free. We've got fantastic prizes to be won. And of course, we have our conference that is scheduled for November, our 12th conference. So in terms of our presenter, Hans is a German. He is a retired accountant. He's now living in Spain. He began to engage with systems thinking in 1990, and since then he's built some 64 odd models, primarily causal loop diagrams. Recently, he created a systems thinking methodology known as a contextual systems thinking at 3 different levels, a methodological vision, and that was actually published on LinkedIn. His latest engagement with systems thinking led him to investigate opportunistic behavior of systems, which would be the subject of this presentation. So over to you, Hans. You're most welcome to start as soon as you're ready.
Thank you. Before I start, I would like to thank the South African Systems Dynamic chapter for giving me the opportunity to do this presentation. I would like to thank especially Dr. Sugnanan, who has extended this invitation to me personally and assisted me with useful information. And of course, I would like to thank everybody who has taken the trouble to attend this meeting and to watch this presentation. 30 years ago, I watched a TV discussion on self-organization, and that discussion shook me. What? Things organize them by themselves? That did not want to fit easily with my German brain, inclined to organize everything around me in order to avoid chaos. But that discussion did also something else. It got me interested in systems and system thinking. And to cut a long story short, as a result, I find myself here today talking to you about a systemic aspect. And it is that goal-seeking systems behave opportunistically. Now, the presentation claims precisely this, and that is that goal-seeking systems behave opportunistically. 1 second, please. And I have examined this proposition in detail in an essay, which preferably you should have read. If you haven't read it, it is available in a PDF format. Both are really important. The essay on the one side and this presentation, because they complement each other. Now, during this presentation, I'm going to talk first of all about gradients, then how gradients fit with opportunistic behavior, followed by opportunistic behavior in relation to systems, insights, and editors. And finally, I'm going to present a real-life example that shows how opportunistic behavior could be used to gain systemic insights. So what is a gradient? A gradient is a difference in pressure, in in temperature, in concentration between 2 points, 2 entities, or 2 regions. And why are gradients important? Well, without gradients, nothing much would happen. Without a temperature gradient, there would be no heat transfer. There would be no thermal energy. Without a pressure gradient, there would be no air movement. There would be no wind. And without an elevation gradient, there would be no potential energy, and there would be no gravity. In other words, there would be no forces, no motion, no change, and no life. You and I would not be here today. Gradients are found everywhere in nature. And in order to have a look at this, we'll have a look at a slide, which I will open now. So gradients occur everywhere in nature. They set up the condition for flows to take place. And if we go to the next slide, here we see gradients are found in, but not only, fluid dynamics. Gradients in pressure drive flows in systems such as rivers, oceans, and atmospheric circulation. Chemical reactions, gradients in concentration, drive diffusion of molecules from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. Thermodynamics, gradients in temperature drive heat transfer processes such as conduction, convection, and radiation. Ecology, gradients in resources such as food availability or habitat drive the movement and distribution of organisms. And in economics, gradients are also found in social systems. Gradients in wealth, resources, opportunities drive flows of people seeking better living conditions or employment opportunity. Okay, let's close this down again. Now, just have a look. Okay, talking about gradients in general, the authors, Eric Schneider and Dorian Sagan, wrote a book called Into the Cool. In it, they examined gradients in detail and, in fact, relate them to thermodynamics. They coined a slogan, they coined a saying, nature abhors gradients, or if you like, nature hates gradients. What do they mean by this? Well, they basically mean to say that wherever there is a gradient, nature tries to eliminate it. And the mechanism they identified is the systems gather around potential gradients to exploit the energy. And in using this energy, of course, they reduce the gradient, which is precisely what nature tries to do. Eric Schneider was a senior scientist with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and Dorian Sagan is a science writer and the son of the famous astronomer Carl Sagan. Now, how do gradients relate to opportunism? In system thinking, the word gradient is not normally used. In system dynamics models, there is the term gap, which is the difference between a current situation and a desired situation on the other hand. In between sits the gap, which comes fairly close to what gradient means, trust of this behavior. But the word gap does not really inherently denote any motivation, whereas opportunistic behavior can be related to motivation. And this is why opportunistic behavior can serve perfectly as a substitute for gradient. To see how opportunistic behavior might fit into a stock and flow diagram, we have a look at another slide. Okay, there we are. Opportunism and stock and flow diagrams. And here is a simple diagram. It shows the current situation on the right-hand side. It shows the goal or desired situation on the left, and the gap sits in the middle. And that drives opportunistic behavior. When there is no constraint that impedes action, the system will implicitly pursue all available opportunities to reach its goal. So here we can see how opportunistic behavior might be seen to fit into a stock and flow diagram. Okay, let's close this down again. Now, one second, please. Let's see where we are. Okay. Right. Now, opportunistic behavior should be seen as a characteristic of the system as a whole rather than the components. If you take a corporation, for example, then the employees and even the directors of that corporation, I'm talking about a large corporation, may not be morally inclined to engage in opportunistic behavior. But that does not guarantee that the corporation as a whole does not engage in opportunistic behavior on occasions. There is a fundamental foundational principle in systems theory and complexity science that says that systems as a whole, the whole system, displays characteristics that are not found in the components. This characteristic is normally referred to as an emergent property. If you go back to the corporation, then the moral behavior of the employees is not intrinsically a characteristic of the system as a whole, because systems are really amoral. They have no morality. Unfortunately, there's some evidence. There are many examples of corporations that have breached moral behavior and unfortunately also broken the law. Now, I have not just invented opportunistic behavior and systems. Some authors have mentioned it. It does appear in the literature on some occasions. In order to show this, I'll open the slides. Right. Some authors have mentioned that systems behave opportunistically. First of all, we have got Jens Paul, 1999, who wrote a book entitled Some Notions of Complex Adaptive System and Their Relationship to Our World. In it, he wrote, therefore, a complex adaptive system is never in equilibrium, but continuously changes as it adapts to its current state in an opportunistic manner. In Principio Cybernetica Web, there are two mentions of systems behaving opportunistically. The first mention says cybernetic systems tend to evolve and grow in an opportunistic manner rather than by design and planned in an optimal manner. And in a different section, all dynamic systems have a central reinforcing feedback loop that drives them to grow whilst they can, to take advantage of any opportunity that permits them to grow. Evidence to support this lies in the fact that all living systems grow to capacity of their habitat. An example is bacteria in a petri dish, which will grow opportunistically until there's no more food or habitat, or until they've poisoned the environment. Okay, let's close this down again. Now, it is useful to distinguish between opportunistic behavior, or rather to contrast opportunistic behavior with systems thinking insights and systems thinking adages. Systems thinking adages are linked to systems archetypes. Now, I won't say much about system archetypes. I assume you're familiar with the most important ones, except to say that they're feedback structure that produce repeated, predictable patterns of behavior. And that behavior can also be seen in real life situations. As regards system thinking adages, well, they are concise statements that convey perhaps shared experience, insights, or truth. An example of system thinking adages: the harder you push the system, the harder it pushes back. These adages give a shorthand impression of the dynamic that underlies some of the system's archetypes, and that makes them useful when looking at complex situations. Let's have a look how these adages might be seen to fit with archetypes, and we'll open another slide for that purpose. There we are, system thinking archetypes and system thinking adages. I've singled out 3 archetypes in order not to make it boring in the end. The first archetype is limits to growth. The principal characteristic: initial rapid growth is eventually slowed down or brought to a halt by limiting factors. Example of related adages: nothing can grow indefinitely on a finite planet. Nothing grows forever. The harder you push a system, the more it pushes back. Let's have a look at the next archetype. That's called fixes that fail. Characteristic: immediate action seems to resolve the problem, but the intervention creates unintended consequences that worsen the situation. Related adages: the harder you push a system, the more it pushes back. Some of these adages relate to more than one archetype. The next one: the more things change, the more they stay the same. Solving one problem creates another one. The solution becomes a problem. Sub-optimization can break the system. And the last archetype, characteristic: short-term solutions relieves the symptoms but prevents fixing the fundamental problem. Examples of related adages: quick fixes create problems down the line. Don't just fix the leak, fix the pipe. The solution becomes a problem. Better before worse. Improving the problem symptoms improves the situation initially, but then it gets worse. And the reverse of this: worse before better. Improving the fundamental situation may cause the situation to get worse initially. And finally, these adages fit to systems thinking archetypes in general. Behavior depends on feedback loop structure. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. You can never do just one thing. From Garrett Hardin, a sociologist and system scientist, American, what he meant to say is that if you do something by intervening in a system, you also do something else. You cause an unintended consequence somewhere else down the line, or perhaps at another location. Okay, let's go back, let's close this down. Now, this in fact now gives us also a clue as to why opportunistic behavior hasn't yet been recognized in systems thinking insight or adage. And the reason is simply this: while systems thinking adages can be related to the pattern of behavior that you can see in archetypes, opportunistic behavior that can't be seen in the patterns of behavior. In a sense, it sits somewhere above that level. It is also useful to distinguish between system thinking insights or adages and systems thinking principles. System thinking principles are basic concepts that describe systems. They're unchanging. There's no contextual dependence. Whereas system thinking adages depend on specific archetypes or specific situations for their meaning. Both of these are useful if you want to look at a situation, for example, a problem situation you have read in a newspaper. Applying both of these can often help to see what systems dynamic might be behind the problem described in the article. Adding opportunistic behavior to other system thinking insights merely adds another interpretive tool, which can only be positive. Now, I think this is all best understood with a practical example, and I will proceed to describe one now. In Spain, 2020, COVID-19, takes us back to COVID-19, there was a tremendous shortage of FFP2 masks, gel, respirators, and other material. And the government came under tremendous pressure to try to get these things, make them available. And the government had a brilliant idea. It thought if it reduced or eliminated the rules and regulation that regulated purchasing or buying sanitary material, that would speed up the process. Good idea. It did it, and lo and behold, masks became available. But a problem arose. Firstly, the government grossly overpaid for some of that material, and local government also overpaid for masks. And then also some of it was defective, in fact, quite a large portion, and some of it was downright useless. Now, how can we understand it from a systemic perspective? Well, first of all, opportunistic behavior is involved. Then in 2020, FFP2 masks were almost exclusively available in China. Everybody wanted them. There were many agents and middlemen buying and then trying to sell them on. And because there was such a demand, of course, they overcharged on these. And they weren't very much concerned about the quality either, because everybody wanted them. If one buyer didn't buy them, another one would. So here, clearly, we've got an example of opportunistic behavior. But I need to explain a system principle that is also at work here, and that is called predictively. That's described by Ross Ashby, a cybernetician. Requisite variety really means that the controlling system must have a variety of means that is sufficient to control the perturbances or the problems that arise from the system is trying to control. So the variety must be at least as big as the possible disturbances that could arise. Now, what happened in that occasion in Spain? Well, when the government very cleverly eliminated the controls on purchasing, it also eliminated the requisite variety. And not surprisingly, that caused problems. Coupled with opportunistic behavior, we can see what happened. To this day, the government has problems and gets accused in parliament from time to time of incompetence and even corruption in relation to these purchases. I have another example, but I think time will allow me to do this. Instead, I would like to give a closing question with a takeaway question. When journalists describe failures in institutions, they often refer to moral indignation. They describe it in moral terms. How could they be so incompetent? And they do this because it makes their articles more interesting and it sells them. My question to you is the following. Given that institutions as systems are really amoral, are not subject to morality, would it not be better for these journalists to describe the problem they arose in systemic terms, in the feedback that drives that behavior? This is a question I would like you to leave us and to think about. Well, thank you very much for listening to this presentation. That concludes it, because I think I've run out of time now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hans. That was indeed very insightful. It was good to hear about the archetypes and the feedback loops in context of a concrete subject, if you can call it that, and something that we can all relate to. So yes, thank you again. We will take questions. I see we have one question from Dr. Botha.
Hi, yes. When I listen to what you're talking about, I come from a chemical engineering background, so entropy and all those things very interesting. But what really struck a chord to me is one of the anomalies in the African economic structure is that we get these areas towards which people move, despite the fact that there's no work anywhere in a country like South Africa. Yet you find people migrating out of the rural areas where they've got a better chance on survival because of the local economics. But then they'll move towards the city centers because there's this perception that there's higher wealth there and there's more opportunities there. And I think that goes, I don't think it's just an African problem or South African problem, because it's also, on the whole African continent, but I think we get similar behavior, and that's why we see all of these people who try by all means, for example, to get from Africa into Europe, from Eastern Europe into Western Europe. I think South America probably has a similar problem to us in South Africa, where everybody is flocking to the cities that can't cope with that population. So, I think it's just another case study or example of where we see those pressure points where there's and it's an inverse one where the pressure sits in the center, but everybody still flocks from the low pressure areas into that high pressure area.
Yes. I think I agree with you. If I've understood correctly, you get people with few economic opportunities in poorer areas being attracted to more prosperous areas. That definitely relates to it, because the prosperous area creates opportunities, and what drives the migration then can be seen the opportunities precisely in the rich area, and you get opportunistic behavior. I think that is probably a good example. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you once again. It's a very, very, very interesting